welcome to Math Blossoms, where growing in mathematics is natural. Today's math topic that we're going to study today is how to find the volume of a sphere or a hemisphere, which is half of a sphere. I'm the teacher, Miss G, and we're going to get started. Let me just get going with this, and we'll move it on over. Volume of a sphere is the measurement of the space inside of the sphere. The units for volume are cubed units. Examples include centimeters cubed, feet cubed, inches cubed, that kind of thing, because it is a three-dimensional shape, and so we are measuring the space inside of it. And as far as real world examples, they're all around us. So here's some examples, like a basketball or any kind of sports ball, like a soccer ball, tennis ball, baseball. They're all spherical shaped. Cherries, oranges, there's some food that are spheres, as well as marbles. That's a good one. So when you're looking around your world, you'll find spheres all over the place. So it is good to know how, you might have a spherical fish bowl or something that you might need to know how much water goes in the fish bowl, and that may be a situation where you need to use the volume, right? So how do I measure the volume of a sphere? So once again, we do have a formula that we use, but basically what happens is we cube the radius, which means we don't just do radius times radius like we do when we find the volume of a cylinder or a cone. For a sphere, it's cubed, not squared. So the radius is going to be radius times radius times radius. That's three of them because it's cubed instead of squared, as in the other formulas that we discussed in the previous two videos. Once you do the radius times radius times radius, then you multiply it times our approximated version of pi, which is 3.14, and then also multiply times 4/3. And just so you know, multiplying times 4/3 is the same as multiplying times the 4 and dividing by a 3. So if your calculator does not have the fraction button, if you're not using Desmos has the fraction button, but if you are not using Desmos and using some handheld calculator or something, just know that when you multiply times a fraction, it's the same as multiplying times the top number or the numerator, and then dividing by the bottom number of that fraction, also called the denominator. So, so for 4/3, it would be multiplying times 4 and dividing by 3. And so this is the formula for the volume of the sphere. 4/3 times pi times the radius cubed. And just to compare with the other two formulas we learned in the previous two videos on cylinders and cones, the height is not present because there is no height of a sphere. There's a diameter and there's a radius. So hemispheres. Hemispheres are when we take a sphere and we cut it in half, just like we would if we cut an orange in half. And so if you are finding the volume of a hemisphere, you have to first find the volume of the entire sphere using the sphere formula that I'm showing you now. And then just divide it by 2, because when we cut things in half, it's the same as dividing by 2 or multiplying times the fraction 1/2. Just as we learned in the cylinder video, when you multiply times 1/3, it's the same as dividing by 3. When we multiply things by 1/2, we can also divide by 2. It's the exact same thing. So let's do some examples. The first example is this sphere here with the radius of 8. Remember, the radius is from the inside. I'm going to use black this time. It's from the center of the circle to the edge of the circle, and it's going to be the same no matter where you draw that radius. If I draw it here, it's still 8. If I draw it here, it's 8. If I draw it here, it's 8. All around the sphere, if it's a equal sphere, then it will be 8 all around for the radius. So we're just going to let the formula guide us by plugging in the numbers that we need to plug into our formula. So 4/3 is the same. Pi, we're going to use 3.14 to get the approximate value of pi, 3.14. And we're going to multiply that times our radius cubed, which is 8. So it's going to be 8 times 8 times 8. And that is cubing it, 3 of them, multiplying together. Okay, let's check this out on Desmos. So if we're using our Desmos calculator, we're going to input the 4/3 first. So let's put our fraction button, which is this button here. We're going to put the 4 on the top as our numerator, the 3 is our denominator. Then we click next to it to get our cursor in the right spot. Why is it? There we go. That's where it needs to be. And then we hit the multiply button and then 3.14 for pi. And then we hit the multiply button again, 8, and then times 8 again, and then times 8 again. And all of that gives us 2,143.57. If we're rounding to the nearest tenth, that 7 is going to round that 5 up to a 6. So let's go ahead and write that down in our approximate value, 2,143.6. And since we're dealing with meters this time, it's going to be meters cubed. Okay. Now to find the in terms of pi volume answer, we do everything that the formula says to do, but we save the pi for last. We don't do that part. So I'm going to basically not do this part right here. Ooh, I'm trying to square it out. My mouse went crazy. We're not going to do this part, this pi part. Okay. We're going to do everything else. So when I go back to my calculator, if you just take out the pi part of your calculations, what's left will be your in terms of pi answer. In this case, it's 682.6. And that 6 to the right of it means I round that 6 in the tenths place up to a 7. So we end up with 682. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. Let me fix this. My mouse is just malfunctioning for some reason. Okay, so 682.7 when we rounded it. And again, this is our pi in terms of pi answer. So we need to put that number next to the pi symbol. And again, it's meters cubed for our units. And we are done giving our answer in terms of pi and also the approximate volume. Okay, remember, in the approximate value, you do the exact thing that the formula says, but for the in terms of pi or the exact value, which is a little more precise, you're going to do everything except multiply it times pi and then place that pi symbol next to it because that does mean 682.7 times pi. Okay. Now, do we have another example? Yes, we do. We have this pink one here with a radius of 5 centimeters. So I'm going to erase my work here and we're going to start over with a 5 centimeter. Let's change colors. We'll use, I haven't used this color in a while. Hopefully it'll show up. So volume equals 4/3. Again, let the formula guide you and just fill in the numbers of what you need to fill in. Okay, so 4/3 times pi, and in this case, we're going to use 3.14 for pi. Multiply that times the radius cubed, and that's 5 in this case, so it would be 5 times 5 times 5. And so when I plug that in my Desmos calculator, again, hit the fraction button, click on the 4, click on the denominator, put the 3 there, then click next to it to get your cursor in the right spot, hit the times button, put in your 3.14 for pi, hit another times button, 5, another times button, 5, and another times button, 5. 3 of them. And we end up with 523.33. This 3 is not going to round that other 3 up. So if we're approximating this, we're going to just write it as 523.3 centimeters cubed for this one. And then, of course, when we do the in terms of pi answer, we are not multiplying it times pi here, but we are doing everything else that the formula says to do. So let's take what our calculation is, and let's just remove this times pi part out. And we end up with 166.6, and the 6 here in the hundredths place is greater than 5. It's 5 or more, so that means I have to round the 6 in the tenths place up to a 7. So when I'm writing my answer, it would be 166.7 centimeters cubed. And don't forget to save that pi for last and put that pi right next to your number there to give that answer in terms of pi. All right, now if I was asked to give the volume of a hemisphere, and let's say they gave you a hemisphere with the same radius of 5, basically you're going to find the entire sphere volume and then just divide it by 2. So if you were asked to find a hemisphere, I'm just going to write the word hemisphere, which is basically taking this sphere and cutting it in half, right? Just like slicing an orange in half. That's what a hemisphere is. It's half of a sphere. So to find half of a number, we just simply divide it by 2. So if we're asking for the hemisphere volume of the pink sphere here, then we're just going to take that number, divide it by 2, and we will get our hemisphere amount. So let me go ahead and do that. Let's clear it out. 523.3, and we're going to divide that by 2, and that's going to give us 261.65, and that 5 is going to make us round that up to the nearest tenth, which is a 7 instead of a 6. So our answer would be 261.7. Oh, my 7's weird. Centimeters cubed. Okay, so that's the volume of half of the pink sphere. If they ask you for a hemisphere, just remember to divide by 2. Okay, so radius versus diameter, things to look out for. Sometimes they give you a sphere with a diameter instead of a radius labeled, and you will need to cut that diameter in half by dividing by 2 in order to find the volume. So here's an example of that. We have this big purple sphere here, and the diameter, it's going all the way across the circle, the sphere. So if that's the case, let me change. We'll use purple since it's a purple sphere. The diameter, I'm just going to put D for diameter. Well, I'll go ahead and spell it out because there's some kids that might not know what that D means. Diameter divided by 2 equals the radius. Just like we divided the sphere volume by 2 to get half of the sphere volume for the hemisphere, we're dividing the diameter by 2 to get the radius, because the radius is exactly half of the diameter. So if my diameter is 18 and I divide that by 2, that means my radius is going to be a 9. Now that we know the radius, we can plug it into our volume formula for sphere, which is 4/3 times pi times the radius cubed. So let's plug in our values. 4/3 stays the same. We're going to multiply that times pi, which is 3.14 when we approximate pi, rounding it to the nearest hundredth. And then we're going to multiply that times the radius, which is 9 up here. This is our radius. So it's going to be 9 cubed. So that's 3 of them. 9 times 9 times 9. All right, let's plug that into our Desmos over here. Whoops. Okay, so when I plug that into Desmos, I'm going to put my fraction button in first, put the 4 on the top as the numerator, the 3 as the denominator, move my cursor to the right, getting it into the right spot, hitting the times button, then putting in the 3.14, then times again, then 9 times 9 times 9. And we end up with 3052.08. If we're rounding it to the nearest tenth, that means that 0 should be rounded up to a 1 because 8 is 5 or greater. And since the 8 in the hundredths place is more than 5, we're going to round that 0 up to a 1. So we end up with 3052.1. And this is centimeters, so we're going to use centimeters cubed. And our answer in terms of pi, again, we just take out this pi part that we did here, but we're going to do everything else. So since I still have it in my calculator here, I'm just going to take out all of this pi stuff. Oops. And what's left is 972. So that's what's going to go here in place of in terms of pi for our more exact answer. And don't forget to save that pi for last and put that pi symbol there. Just like dinner, dessert is last. So the pi should be last on the in terms of pi answers. All right, and then of course, if they asked us to find the hemisphere volume of this sphere, you would take all of this amount and just divide it by 2 to get your hemisphere volume. Also be on the lookout, we've mentioned this in the 2 previous videos, but the pi button on your Desmos calculator, it includes a lot more digits of pi, not all of them. So it is still an approximation, but it does include more digits than the 3.14. So if you get a slightly different answer when you use the pi button than when you use the 3.14, that is why. The answers will be very, very close though. And so great job, you guys. Let's remember that when calculating the volume of I put cone there. That should say sphere. Let me fix that. Oops. Oh, I thought I could make that. Whoops. Let me just write sphere over it. Sphere. I forgot to change that apparently from the last video. So remember when calculating the volume of a sphere, not a cone. Okay, not a cone. We use the formula volume equals 4/3 times pi times the radius cubed. And remember that multiplying times 4/3 is the same as multiplying times 4 and dividing by 3 in case your calculator does not have a fraction button. Also, remember that to use 3.14 or the pi button, the answers are for both will be approximate answers, very close to each other, but slightly different. And then remember to use the radius of the sphere to calculate the volume, not the diameter. Divide the diameter by 2 to find the radius. And then also remember that a hemisphere is exactly half of a sphere. So first find the volume of the entire whole sphere and then divide it by 2 to get the volume of the hemisphere. So that concludes our video on how to find the volume of the sphere and the hemisphere. So great job. Remember to keep trying if you're trying to calculate these things, you're struggling, just keep trying. Don't give up, and you will grow in math and you will get there eventually. And it's okay to ask for help while you're learning, because everybody needs help from time to time. And also, everybody makes mistakes from time to time. So don't be afraid to do that. Mistakes are just another opportunity to learn more. So we'll see you next time. Now it's time for me to say it was lovely teaching you math today.